Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 14, 15th century, early Renaissance. Soon after 1400, Cicogna, Flemish-born Italian, closed his career with the ceremony motets, which initiate in music the spatial clarities of early Renaissance. At the same time, art formed an horizon of humanizing sacred brightness, the international style, from this 1398 Dei Grassi in Italy through Burgundy and France, this Dijon Breudelam, across the Channel to the winsome alabaster reliefs of England. Back to Cologne, where the softest jewelling of all runs from this 1410 Madonna to the ultimate child wonder of Lochner, as late as 1440. So we might return by the Rhine and Danube. To the gold leaf devotions of Fra Angelico in Florence. City of classical recovery in Gothic grace. Here Ghiberti's early work on the baptistry doors had opened the century. By its close, art gathers its force in Michelangelo's first Pietà, music in the death lament which Isaac, Fleming at the court of Florence, wrote for Lorenzo il Magnifico, died 1492. at such advance of consciousness in the science of incarnate sway, we heirs to its later pride feel a shudder of tragic awe. As if the whole rational realist thrust of civilization were an age-old mistake, some Luciferian fall from mythic immediacy. So it was at the Greeks that Charles Olson, in his Black Mountain Lectures on History, pointed the finger of Nietzschean blame. Man lost something just about 500 B.C. and only got it back just about 1905 A.D. As in Mark's Magic Forest, Berg's Lyric Suite, Rilke's Exposed on the Peaks of the Heart, of uncleft consciousness indeed there moves many about, many a qualmless hill beast moves and delays, and the great inviolable bird circles the summit's virgin refusal, but here, unsheltered, here, on the peaks of the heart. Surely, if we pursue the revolution by which a Michelangelo Hell Fury becomes the summons of a national Arc de Triomphe, arrogating its brazen book of law and iron book of war over space, time, and cause, who would not ask where history went wrong? And the modern appeal to the pre-Greek, cycladic, and abstract is of a piece with Olson's oblique claim that at the beginning of the Periclean century something happened by which man was broken from the functionalities of nature and tribe, that it was philosophic scrutiny of self and world which stamped the brow furrowing of consciousness on centuries to follow. Though if that palpable resolve to compose symbolic reality to the deliberate measure of man was a mistake, it was not made once only, but before and after 2400 B.C., when Egypt became the cradle of civilization by great discoveries that way. Subsequently, by the Greeks, this Sapphic Kore of 500 B.C., and again, marking another 2,000 years as Christendom emerged from the trance of medieval seizure. And strange, if mistake, that it should produce in each case an expression of such vernal delight, the archaic smile, renewed in this Baldovinetti Virgin, as pure as fetching, seated on some Florentine height over the discovered Val d'Arno. So the beauty of earth, an Orphic voice through Dante's dead land, là dov'esser Dei giocondo, there where one ought to be happy, blooms in 15th century Poliziano. To behold the valleys and hills and air pure, grass and flowers, rivers cold and clear, to hear the birds sing and the waters sound, and low wind murmuring among the fronds, see apples heap the earth and bend the trees, and the ripe wheat run in billows like the sea, e lebbiare ondeggiar come fa il mare. As if a drunk who must end in murderous sick despair our ravaged civilization of the bateau ivre could still look back to a morning age when the first Promethean draughts had awakened to life and love in what remains perhaps the most lovable of our centuries, the 15th. Trace the waking from the century before. In a Daddi Madonna, the burning mystery of Dante's praise, Vergine Madre, figlia del tuo figlio, maiden and mother and daughter of your son, humble and exalted beyond every creature, determined goal of eternal counsel, termine fisso d'eterno consiglio. Has lightened like the music of Landini through Boccaccio, O Regina degli Angeli, O Maria, Mary, Queen of the angels of heaven, adornment of the sky, whose smiling features, star of the sea, guide into their haven wanderers from the way, your witless creatures. Toward the 15th century ease of Belcari's sacred plays, lily of May, flower of blessedness, with chastity and all the virtues else adorned of every kind and loveliness, we honor you above all saints and angels. What Botticelli would culminate in this Magnificat Madonna. Europe refining from the Gothic past some Beulah wedding of earth and heaven, you shall no more be called desolate, for your land shall be married. Bruges, 1425. Jan van Eyck's church remains mystical. That sun shines from the north as on Dante's paradise, but it irradiates, like daily realities, the Gothic lines, the angels in the choir, the pageant queen. Such the light in an English Advent poem. I sing of a maiden that is markeless, king of all kinges to her son she chase. He come all so still there his mother was, as dew in April that falleth on the grass. He come all so still to his mother's boor, as dew in April that falleth on the floor. He come all so still, there his mother lay, as dew in April that falleth on the spray. Mother and maiden was never known, but she well may switch a lady, goddess mother be. Music, if nothing else, would make us treat 15th century Europe as a whole. To hear what those angels might be singing in the Van Eyck choir, we turn to Dufay. At the same time bringing the musicians nearer, as in the Ghent altar of the Lamb. Yet Dufay's Gloria in the manner of trumpets, with canon above and ostinato below. Is from about 1430, when Italian and Flemish Dufay was with the papal choir. So Luca della Robbia's Florentine choir boys would serve as well. Or Godzill's Angels, past mid-century, from the Medici Chapel. Or Piero della Francesca's, from the London Nativity. As worship turns to dance, it will be Luca della Robbia again. Or from Donatello's facing gallery, the more bacchanalian abandon of dancing genii. This is new wine in the old faith bottles. Browning's Brother Lippo stealing in from a night frolic to paint on Jerome, knocking at his poor old breast with his great round stone to subdue the flesh. It is Vasari who tells how Lippi chose the novitiate Lucrezia as model for a Prato Madonna, finished nun as it were with the picture, took her off to be his mistress, thereafter portrayed as Mary. And their lively urchins as Christ and the angels, religion as sprightly as Charles of Orleans' confession. My ghostly father, I me confess, first to God and then to you, that at a window, wot ye how, I stole a kiss of great sweetness. But I restore it shall, doubtless, and that to God I make a vow. While French Fouquet turned Charles VII's Agnes Sorel to a Mary of pneumatic bliss. A levity naive as its embrace in faith. Chiamo il dolce Gesù e canto, canto. But to Mary mild and Jesu child I sing, I sing. Some years before the meeting with Lucrezia, Lippi had painted the Uffizi Coronation of the Virgin, in which, by the startlingly personal St. Lucy below, with her children, the later affair seems prefigured. For Browning, this is the prior's niece who comes to care about his asthma. Oh, that white, smallish female with the breasts, she's just my niece, whom Lippi has chosen for this picture. I shall paint God, Madonna, ringed in a bowery, flowery angel brood, in the front a saint or two. The artist himself then, as Browning thought, in his monk's robe, come up as from a dark stair, mazed, until that sweet angelic slip of a thing intercedes. This man did the work, as on the scroll, Iste perfecit opus. Such the Ave Regina, Dufay troped for himself, miserere supplicanti Dufay. Or the lighter greeting of his month of May rondo, Carissime, du failli vous en prie. Carissime, du failli vous en prie. It is likely that in the fresco fragment in the Carmine cloister left, the young Lippi has represented his delight in whatever is perceived. Browning from Vasari. First, every sort of monk, the black and white, I drew them, fat and lean. While as late as the Prato frescoes, two girls whispering of Herodias' demand for John the Baptist's head make such discovery unforgettable. Was not Lippi's art sire, the saintly Fra Angelico, entering Renaissance by the same observational road, his mid-century St. Lawrence distributing alms, dominated by the blind beggar, right, where spirituality springs exactly from heightened sense? So Browning's Lippi, studying The Watchman, calls for a bit of chalk. We have seen the secular hauntingly suspended in the synthesis of creed, sharp as this winter from Notre Dame. In a Goliard poem, De rames cadunt folia, the bleak time burns with love. So too with Perrine d'Angecourt, 13th century troubadour. In Lorenzetti's 14th century winter, the mystery is distilled through a realism strange as the smoky rain in Chaucer, which keeps crusade at Pandora's house for the consummation required. So Dante, in the Vita Nuova, speaks with the ladies who pity him. And as sometimes we see water fall mingled with white snow, so it seemed their talk issued forth, mingled with sighs. Guillaume de Machaut's double leading tones. Lorenzetti's panorama of a well-governed countryside have offered such exploratory translations of reality. Each detail of that vast spread in August in a hay saison, when corn is corven with crocus cane, holds the dream of spacelessness. With the 1400s, estrangement ebbs. The calendar of the Très Riche Earls, Burgundian rondos, this Arnauld de Lantin, breathe natural air. Even the plays of 1400 Flanders accomplish the human passage. Sandarine tells her new knight of her seduction by the baron who has cast her off. She speaks in the metaphor of a blossoming tree from which a falcon has robbed one flower. And he says, one flower is nothing, to speak of it no more, it will not set him against the tree he loves. In English, the greatest poetry of the seasons is from Gawain and the Green Knight. We trim to summer and the coming on of fall. After, the season of summer with the soft winds, when Zephyrus siffles himself on sedis and herbes, well a ween is the wort that waxes their root, when the Duncan dew droppes off the leaves, to be the blissful blush of the bright sunne. But then he is tervis and tarnes him son, warnes him for the winter to wax full reaper, he drives with droch the dust for to rise, for the face of the folder to flee full here. Wrath wind of the welkin rastless with the sun, the leaves lansen for the lind and lichten on the grunda. Those alliterations heightening every mood, as in the miniature the face of the sower of winter wheat. And all greyes the grass that grain was era, then all reapus and rotus that rose upon first, and thus yearness the year in yesterday's morning, and winter windes again as the world asks no facher. The 1400 castle rising behind, like the one Gawain sees over the December woods, towers set up between, pinnacled full thick, turrets with carved tops and chalk-white chimneys. Gawain must precede the Tres Richeus, but Charles d'Orléans, English captive, here writing in French, more than matches its period harmony. Le temps a laissé son manteau, de vent, de froidure et de pluie, et s'est vêtu de broderie, de soleil luisant, clair et beau. Rivières, fontaines et ruisseaux portent en livrée jolie, gouttes d'argent et d'or favoris. Chacun s'habille de nouveau, le temps a laissé son manteau. With Lang's rendering, the year has changed his mantle cold of wind, of rain, of bitter air, and he goes clad in cloth of gold, of laughing suns and seasons fair. All founts, all rivers seaward rolled, the pleasant summer livery wear, with silver studs on broidered veil. The world puts off its raiment old, the year lays down his mantle cold. We have moved from the Limburg calendar to its Grimani translation a century later, time of Josquin, in the robes and haze of bourgeois realism. Such a filling in as that of Arthurian romance over the 300 years from Chrétien to Malory. Since the Tres Richeus, here January, like Cicogna's 1400 setting of Old Rosa Bella, has still a trace of the old chivalric suspension of space, time, and cause. When Chrétien's Lancelot, seeking Guinevere, has crossed the sword bridge into the land from which no stranger returns, he is viewed from a tower window by King Bademagu, very scrupulous and precise about honor and what was right, and by his son and opposite, the queen's captor Meliagant, who never wearied of villainy, treason, and felony. In Malory, 1470, there is no good King Bademagu and no symbolic land. With an armed force, Meliagrança surprises the queen at Maying and takes her to his castle 7 miles from Westminster. Lancelot gets word. Meliagrança's archers shoot his horse. He forces a driver to take him up in what for Chrétien was the mysterious cart. From a bay window the queen espied by his shield that he was there himself, Sir Lancelot du Lake. And then she was where came his horse ever after that chariot, and ever he trod his guttis and his paunch under his feet. Alas, said the queen, now I see well and prove that well is him that hath a trusty friend. As in the Grimani dancening, the very knights and queens accept the probabilities of the middle class. If there are turning points in history, the Van Eyck miniatures from the Turin hours by one or both brothers, and surely from the 1420s or before, are the point of departure for all the realism, trees, water, atmosphere, and distance to follow. They succeed the Limburg brothers as this Dunstable, O Rosa Bella, does the Cicconia, just heard. Not finer, not better, but polyphonically, sensuously, melodically advanced. As Martin Lefrance wrote, Dufay and Binchois against the early century of Carmen and Césaris have assumed the English style and followed after Dunstable. That mutation of 1425 differentiates the new Europe from everything that had gone before. The 1400 softening of international style had cognates as far as the Byzantine, most tellingly in Russia, though the gentlest art of the West seems physical beside the mystic accord of Rublev's weightless angels, forming at their Abraham supper the flower-frail round of a trinity. In Europe, that horizon of grace becomes, as with Sluter, a Renaissance launching ground, thus the incarnate Christ which crowns his Dijon fountain. In the apt Redemptio hymn, the revolution of immediacy takes the same center. The melody has risen from medieval tenor to descant. The bass settles down, seeking for Bourdon chords. Second progressions begin to yield to those of the fourth and fifth. That simple ordering of harmonic space founds the Renaissance lauda. History moves by the precipitation and inbreeding of opposites. Gothic flamboyance spills into the very years of humanist solemnity. Thus the miniatures of Bel Bello, completing the Visconti hours with the terminal dissonances of Ars Nova, De Haspre. Siena is the most startling art bastion of a Gothic Byzantine heightened by new experiment. In Giovanni di Paolo's Entombment, Peter does not interrupt, but casts a transreal shadow on the gold light itself of the grave. In music, the French court of Cyprus, until its 1426 sack by the Sultan, tops the isorhythmic brilliance of the school of Machaut, from the Amen of a Gloria. These pockets of fantastic continuance are not merely backward-looking. Their symbolic agitation, gathering material force, will break into the Renaissance again and again, as Savonarola would stir Medici Florence, or Mannerist distortion climax in El Greco. In Florence, the lingering transition works wonders of mystical sweetness. Monaco, Gentile, Fra Angelico. Barolo's hymn to the Virgin, O Celestial Light, melodizes the starry blend. It is the celestial light of that chant which the saved enter in Fra Angelico's paradise, most childlike of those blessed gardens so much preferred to hell by Villon's mother, Le joie avoir me fait, haute déesse. What came from the Song of Songs through the wellspring of Revelation and the smiling depth of Dante's shores, painted with spring's miraculous colors, has grown as artlessly innocent as the Mary of the Lords, Madre Esposa, Candida olente rosa, herself that orchard enclosed, its fragrant herbs, its clear fountain of life, bel cari, viva fontana e chiara vena. The quantum leaps of history are not entirely localized. We cannot say when the limpid grace was penetrated by the humanist wedge. There had been Klaus Sluter in Dijon, precocious as English Chaucer. While in Florence, Renaissance Center, Brunelleschi's dome has not lost the bareness of the 1368 plan, that stamp of God's Gothic barn, which gives it a strength over all other domes. Vasari stresses Brunelleschi's 1403 sketching from Roman temples and measuring of the Pantheon. But Hadrian's brooding cement mass could hardly have suggested the levitational soar of Santa Maria del Fiore, its curve, as Vasari quotes Brunelleschi, that of a pointed arch. Whatever Rome inspired, the double shell of this ribbed and self-buttressed vault looked for its engineering to the Gothic north. And Masaccio's noble art, by whatever blend of Giotto, nature, the classic, fulfills medieval incorporation to sanctify these sensuous presences. Had not Paul and John promised a glorified body in which we shall be sons of God and like him? Had not Thomas Aquinas made charity, friendship, under the daring of co-humanity with God, quoting Christ, "No longer will I call you servants, but my friends." As for music, there was nothing antique to recover. Renaissance had to shape its forms from the polyphony of the Middle Ages. It was Dufay who wrote the motets for the 1436 consecration of this cathedral. Their swelling four-voice canons share in its grandeur. Yet a witness to that pomp paraphrases 12th century Suger on the anagogical gift of the new light. During these moments I enjoyed so much delight that it seemed to me I was partaking on earth of the life of the blessed. Humanist assertion, Roman recovery, civic pride meet in sacred containment. Uccello had just painted the equestrian hawkwood in the cathedral where Dufay's music was performed, and in the Amen of that praise of Florence, the condottiere vont seems made in chords. Literature after the 14th century ebbs, weighed down by too much Latin revival. Yet Alberti, humanist architect, breaks Gothic continuance with the first sonnet of Renaissance rhetoric and universalizing consciousness. Petrarch's residual bareness, solo e penso sui più deserti campi, vo misurando a passi tardi e lenti. Alone and sad, I measure empty fields, yields to emotion almost that of Shakespeare, consumed with that which it was nourished by. Alberti, with Donatello's Gattamelata. Io vidi già seder nell'arme irato, uom furioso e pallido tremare. I saw of late an armed and furious man, that for his anger trembled and was pale. And eyes I saw, whereof tears trenchant ran, for too great heat that did the heart assail. And I beheld a lover so long brood that he for sorrow could not weep or wail, nor rarely saw those that could touch no food because of hunger that had made them frail. I saw a vessel float and veer with wind, which wind too great did founder in the flood, and watched the greyhound as he coursed the hind, for too great swiftness lose her in the wood. Thus I beheld how nature doth dispense to most of wishing, least of consequence. Perspective typifies the new ordering, art precursor of natural science. Here Masaccio applies Brunelleschi's conception, how the vault looms viewed like the great robed figures from below, while the cross, breaking that system, meets us head-on. This theoretic space, this space of mind, will make as clear as possible the divergent modes of Florence, and against it of Flanders, Jan van Eyck's contemporary space of eye. In this Arnolfini betrothal, the capture of reality proceeds by awakened sense and skilled hand, in textures, shadowing, and touch, beyond anything Italy would produce for generations, though if the recessive lines of floor, ceiling, window, bed are in fact plotted, they form, as in the school of Giotto, separate convergences. Of course, an interior scanned by an actual viewer will have as many meeting points as the fixes of the scanning eye. What is in question is not reality itself, whatever that may mean, but space heroically formulated by the mathematics of Florentine mind. It is that universal grasp which lifts the Masaccio to the verge of awe. Meanwhile, in both pictures, the new techniques become sacramental. They reconstitute devotion. This frontal father, the kind of image Cusanus would call omnivoyant, viewing all viewers, brings the sacred into spatial grandeur. Yet even the Van Eyck records a sacrament of marriage, Panofsky, the clogs, put off your shoes, for this is holy ground, the single candle for the eye of God, the painter as witness, seen in the mirror, Jan van Eyck was here. If what revolutionizes faith in Masaccio is the theoretical and classical, here it is the pietistic pervasion of the brothers of the common life. Such counterthrusts compose the time wave. Within the bounds of Italy, Venice and Florence present a complementarity. In Venice, the Gothic tracery of the Ca' d'Oro, finished 1434, left. From Florence, 12 years later, the Rucellai Palace by Alberti, with its classical pilasters and rustic masonry, share in the individual and worldly emergence. From the same years, the Town Hall of Brussels, extending the European axis from Tuscany to Flanders, speaks the north in no way backward, its flamboyant stone spired to a search as boldly Faustian. Art and music convey the embryonic interworking of that web of commerce and skills, letters and science. Let this descent from the cross, begun by Lorenzo Monaco before 1425 and finished by Fra Angelico, be the Florentine harbinger. For music we choose from Dufay's 1450 return to Italy, the Qui Tollis from his first tenor mass, C'est la face ai pas, brilliantly sung by Munro's consort. We cannot tell if Angelico's expressive composition, with even the central rise of the foliated frame, suggested, perhaps through a woodcut, Roger van der Weyden's Prado descent, with its central rise and framing filigree. Here, although the shallow space and gold ground look backward, the fleshed and robed passion of these sufferers surges ahead. So in Dufay, the fabric of sound deepens over 20 years to the Qui Tollis of his last Mass, Ave Regina Celorum, sung at the dedication of the Cathedral of Cambrai. In music, the aesthetic balance of Italy, as influential as in the other arts, works through the humbler forms of laude and frottole. One piece, Per la mia, may stake out the hidden claim. The words and perhaps the tune by Giustiniani from the early century, the setting, it seems, somewhat later. Such smooth harmonies as Ghiberti wrought into the final doors, those Michelangelo thought worthy to be the gates of paradise. Throughout the century, the great northern composers are in continual touch with this melodious soul of Italy. Over 200 years, the Gothic architecture of the North had unfolded from the structural severity and mystical distance of 13th century Bourges, this theology of triune lights with a school of Perotin melisma, to foliate through the next century the trace-rid wealth of England, so Norwich choir, music sweetening from the Worcester fragments around 1300 to Bennett on the eve of Dunstable. By 1450, those Gothic branchings had ripened as here at Ulm, a columned and lighted pre-Reformation hall, while the blind organist Paumann wreathed the Benedicite in triadic harmonies. By the paired rebirth of North and South, this last Gothic shares in the spatial ease of early Renaissance. More than all the round-arched precursors of Italian Romanesque, from Lucca and Florence to this 12th century Cathedral of Bari in Apulia. What if they are called Proto-Renaissance? That proto goes centuries back, as to a solemn crypt, as far from the lightning of Ulm, as from Brunelleschi's lofty liberation of the Roman basilica from the weight of Rome. In music, Dunstable, who worked on the continent, influenced from Italy and known there, spearheaded such 1425 changes. His Veni Sancte Spiritus, Come Holy Spirit, esteemed and sung through the century, gives mystical love the breath and hypnotic weaving of sensuous sound. Of the sustained Cape recording, we hear only the closing section. When Michelangelo praised Donatello's 1412 St. Mark, it was not for Roman face, nor for Gothic robe, but for sacred humanization. It would have been impossible to have rejected the gospel if preached by such a straightforward man as this. Masaccio's concern with earth, to show common men in the commonest alley of Florence, does not preclude but empowers a deeply religious art. Peter and John walk forward, wrapped in thought. Peter's shadow heals the sick and lame. One risen prays, another rises, a third huddles, the uplifted face lighted around caves of mouth and eye. Over the contrast already made of medium and style, the brothers Van Eyck served the same transformation. Everything of the world, stuff, jewels, hair, lends light and touch to the heavenly. Here, also from the Ghent altar, is another of Cusanus' omnivoyance. If I strive in human fashion to transport you to things divine, I have found nothing better than an image which is omnivoyant. Such I call the icon of God. This picture, brethren, ye shall set up in some place, and each of you shall find, from whatsoever quarter observed, that it looks at him as if it looked at no other. In the Flemish succession of mid-century, and in creative exchange with Italy, the humanization of the gospel proceeds. Here, Van der Weyden, from during or after his Florentine stay. In Italy, too, as the powers of Masaccio fill out the forms of Gothic tenderness, the 40s and 50s fruit in saintly celebration, as present as Angelico's garden where Christ greets the Magdalene. In music, Ockeghem, Dufay's successor, holds an all-time summit of heavenly polyphonic weaving, the serene stretching and enhancement of Dunstable's fabric. The works of the Florentine organist Squarcialupi are lost. The Italian pieces that remain, from Romanus of 1416 to Gaffurio toward the end of the century, are not recorded. In any case, the Flemings were dominant, and there is no one, before or after, who could suspend such a web of besouled breathing as Ockeghem. Here the Qui Tollis, from the Mass Ecce Ancilla Dei. In Veneziano, the old triptych turns to a colonnaded space in which a calm of form and pastel color looks to Piero della Francesca, this resurrection of God in Olympian flesh and robe. Here, with as rapt and omnivoyant as art offers, we conclude Cusanus' vision. As in a mirror, an icon, a riddle, I see life eternal, which is nothing else but that blessed regard, that gaze of love which never ceases to behold me, even the most secret places of my soul. In mid-century France, Fouquet has shown forth the rose courts of blessing, and Cusanus, for with thee to behold is to give life, to inflame by love's imparting, and in imparted flame to let me drink the dew of gladness, drink and be infused with the fountain of life, co-partner with thee and thy Son in immortal bliss. The source of all delights, the maximum undeprived of every rational desire, than which a greater cannot be conceived. By 1480 in Bruges, Memling clothes the simple coming in a fruitful ease of earth and waters. At the same time in Florence, Botticelli refines the mystical to an aesthetic of starred fabrics and translucent veils. But Gothic had been stretched from the start between peace and frenzy, the peace enriching its texture, the frenzy more material in drive. By the 1430s, Della Quercia's bronze doors in Bologna have passed the bequest of power to Michelangelo. In the Brancacci Chapel of the Carmine, we feel it like a gospel command, that passage from the Gothic line and mystery of Marcellino's innocent temptation to the tragic expulsion of Masaccio. Marcellino had chosen this pupil and collaborator, yet how those quiet sinners of his Eden must have gazed across the chapel toward their nobler expulsion, paradise well lost. So too in Pisanello's 1435 fresco of St. George and the Princess. With the housing of beatitude, force too knits its fabric. The attack is of realism itself, a keenness of seeing and being which arose out of Gothic, that gibbet here against the sky. Until all the Magdalens and beggar rogues of soul-leveling Christendom meet in Villon and Fat Margot, come back whenever you're in rut, to this brothel where we hold our state. Retournez-y quand vous serez en oui, en ce Bordeaux où tenons notre état. Or, to match Pisanello's detail, I am Francois, I confess, born in Paris, near Pontoise, and by 6 feet of hemp grass my neck will learn the weight of my ass. In Florence, before mid-century, the pastel calm of Veneziano is complemented by Castagno, here from A Last Supper. Can you minister to a mind diseased? Castagno, I will set its diseases visibly before you. Among the variegated marble panels of this room, that where Judas sits across from Christ traces the hell walls of his jealous thought. As the factual comes to parity with its faith containment, an expression is first possible, as in the Ferrara Months by Cossa about 1470, lean and hard as Gothic, yet already of Bruegel's Renaissance earth. Dante had led the way, as in the metaphor of Inferno 24, where a peasant takes the frost for snow. When the hoarfrost on the ground copies the likeness of her white sister, and the peasant who needs fodder rises and looks out and sees the fields all whitened, and turning back to the house smites his thigh. By the time of these Casa frescoes, such calendar observation, this March vineyard was the life of Mantuan, Turbeville's translation, 1567. The man that erst did sow and tilled his stony soil hath let afield his plough and takes his ease. The weary ground itself doth slumber now. The shepherd, having shut his doors and caught his cloak, keeps house. Neara eke doth sit at home in smothering smoke at chimney nook and plies her pottage pot apace. In the Rohan hours, from about 1425, such realism had incised within Gothic the biting winter of Villon's legacy. Sur le Noël morte saison, Quenelle. Near Christmas, the dead time, when wolves live on the wind and men stick to their houses against the frost close by the blaze. In Fouquet's Medallion, self assumes that edged precision. No wonder the Testament so worked on Pound and Eliot. Villon in the first, called Small, penning his bitter bequests until the ink is frozen and the candle blown out. In the second, called Great, Villon himself burnt out. En l'an de mon 30e âge. In the 30th year of my age, having drunk my fill of shame, written in the year 61, when the good king delivered me from the harsh prison of Mung. I spit phlegm as white as cotton, gobs as big as tennis balls, thanks to God and Jacques Thibault, who gave me cold water underground. In Florence, that carborundum would hone Pollaiolos, Hercules, and Antaeus to a scalpel. Under which beauty thins to the wistful delight of the Paul di Pezzoli girl, mostly attributed to that same anatomist, Pollaiuolo, as if for all freshness and joy, Dufay's Adieu M'amour was sounding. So the wailful brightness of Villon's best-known ballade, Des Dames du Temps Jadis, Dites-moi où, dans quel pays, est Flora la belle romaine, mais où sont les neiges d'antan? Of which Rossetti, for all his yesteryear, caught something. Where is echo, beheld of no man, only heard on river and mere? She whose beauty was more than human, but where are the snows of yesteryear? Villon's ballade is introduced by a description of death, sharp as those tombs where sometimes worms and mice crawl from the sculptured corpse, yet of strange beauty. Simon's, no, I am not, as others are, child of the angels, with a wreath of planets or of any star. My father's dead, and lies beneath the churchyard stone, God rest his breath. I know that my poor old mother, and she too knows, must come to death, and that her son must follow her. After comes the old helmet-maker, with peaked chin and cheeks all waste and dead, and lips that are two skinny rags, elsewhere compared with this Donatello Magdalene, though the Magdalene might stand as well for Villon's mother in her prayer to Our Lady. I am a woman, very old and poor. I know nothing, I cannot read at all. But when I go to church, I see on the wall a painted heaven, where harps and lutes are, a hell also, where damned spirits boil. One gives me happiness, the other fear. Give me the happiness, goddess of the sky, to whom all sinners should render without guile, theirs and themselves, in love and humble prayer. And in this faith I choose to live and die. Lachner's judgment reviving for us, with the vigor of a Dufay Gloria, what was painted in all the churches of Christendom, the timeless drop, without which the action of Renaissance loses its stretch and tuning. As the helmetress says of earth's joy, comment reste-t-il en tes péchés? In Donatello's Christ, in Villon's Every Man's Self, the rising tragic twist is of the ennobled but mortal frame. Whoever dies, dies with much pain, for when his wind and breath are sped, his gall breaks on his heart, and then he sweats. God knows that sweat of men. No need to ask how God knows. Son fiel se crève sous son cœur, puis su, Dieu sait quelle sueur. Significant for the whole Pascalian reversal of Promethean Renaissance, that Donatello, spearhead of pagan recovery and sensuous enfleshment, should also have led in the break to penitential force. From his Padua altar, the passion whirl spreads and mounts through Mantegna, from the early frescoes to this foreshortened dead Christ. And in music, too, the stress of the humanist wedge driven into Gothic swells toward the late century and Reformation. Curious that where we invoked Ockeghem, supposed canon tormentor, for floating ease, we call on Obrecht, supposed softener, for the fevered counterpole. Such the cry of contrition which shook Botticelli and burned Savonarola. And already by the 70s, in the Ferrara from which Savonarola would move to Florence, Cosimo Tura had forged from Gothic and Donatello an anticipation of Mannerist and Baroque, strange as in later literature Gongora and Donne. Yet through the same years, Antonella de Messina, absorbing into Sicilian post-Gothic the space of Florence, with the nature and oil techniques of Flanders, was preparing, even in this crucifixion, for the rich calm of Venetian high Renaissance, while northern composers, here from the Agnus of the same Obrecht Mass, have steeped their counterpoint in the chordal expressiveness of Italy. Here, a peasant's lament for his dead donkey. And had those humanists heard that early Christians were rumored to have worshipped a crucified ass? If the style work of the 15th century is the articulation of humanist islands within the eddying continuance of medieval faith, it is in Florence that the unconscious change, drop added to drop until crystallization nears, most dramatically presses toward conscious reordering. There the precursive souls, from Donatello, St. George, 1415, to Michelangelo, David, 1501-4, magnify the reasoned assertion of power, while others, from Angelico, 1430, to Botticelli, 1500, refine the spirit and line of Gothic, but with such ripening of the sensuous and aesthetic as involves them in the same vortex. The polarity working to climax had shown itself in Donatello. On the pagan side, with Josquin's Frotoli, El Grillo, come Lorenzo de Medici's satyrs and nymphs in Bacchic dance, or da Bacco riscaldati, ballon, saltan, tuttavia, taking up the levity of Donatello's sportive relief below, no doubt seen by Mantegna on his 1466 Florentine visit. Compare his triumph of Silenus above. yet Donatello's carousing Amorini. Adorn the base of his most puzzling late bronze, Judith hacking off the head of Holofernes. That harrier of Israel dies drunk. The cushions beneath him seem spouting wineskins. So the Bacchantes in Poliziano's pioneer opera, Isaac's Music Lost, display the head of deviant Orpheus, Evoe, Bacco, Bacco. Over all sex-death puzzles of this bronze pillar of flesh, one thing is clear, that the tension of the century and of Donatello himself between pagan delight and penitential seizure has been spanned in a prophetic monument. But Josquin, too, worked over that divide against the Grillo, and from the same Petrucci record, his Mass, Ave Maris Stella, raises the plea to the Lamb of God to a last strident cry. Such Savonarolas, oimè. All Italy has asked the judgment of war and plague. Return to Jesus Christ, his mother and meek spouse. Quit the inveterate vice of your godless ways. No one lived both myths, pagan and Christian, more poignantly than Botticelli. His 1475 Medician Adoration of the Magi assumes the bel vivere of his master Lippi. Old Cosimo kneels to the child. In front, his son Piero, both dead by that time, faces the radiant Giuliano, soon to be murdered in the Pazzi conspiracy. Far right, looking out, we cannot miss the proud painter Alessandro. Far left, Lorenzo, citizen ruler, holds court. Poliziano, prodigy of Renaissance poetry, fawns on him, a caress even Lorenzo's horse toothfully resents. Perhaps a year after this painting, Giuliano's love for Simonetta, Vespucci by marriage, would come to the climax of the January 1476 tournament, over which he, Victor, would crown her queen. On April 26th of the same year, Simonetta's death of consumption ranked their love with Petrarch's and Dante's. On the second anniversary of her death, Giuliano's assassination turned it to myth. As Poliziano had written, for Giuliano, she seemed Minerva in act, Venus in face, or in La Giostra, candida è ella, e candida la vesta, ma pur di rose e fior dipinta ed erba. In Botticelli's Primavera, realm of that Simonetta Venus, Mercury, with his wand, disperses gathering clouds. How Dante's simultaneous levels of literal, political, moral, and anagogical meaning might reconcile our critics. If Simonetta comes to this grove through the dispersed cloud of death, it remains Tuscan Elysium, from which good counsel would banish clouds to ensue. As Striggio would write for Monteverdi's Orfeo more than a century later, Dei, sommi Dei, non torcete da noi benigno il guardo. So with Botticelli's Pallas and the Centaur, the contention of political or moral ignores the same Dante to Can Grande. No doubt the delivery of reason from man-beast is guided by Minerva. Yet her dress, adorned with the Medici emblem, surely hints at Lorenzo and some feat of diplomatic control. Is the control more threatened in this Mars and Venus of perhaps a year later? It is cheerful when Venus as humanitas prevails over Mars as discord. So at Alexander's marriage, Lucian, Cupid's played with his armor. But this loved-out Giuliano Florence is in jeopardy. He sleeps while those lusty satyrs with the lance stir up a hornet's nest. That the pun on Vespe, wasp, suggests the patronage of Simonetta's Vespucci can only complement the danger, which, as in biblical prophecy, is both past and future. By 1490, in the head of St. John, from the Barnabas altar, Botticelli wakes to the fullness of time being announced by Savonarola in his San Marco sermons of that year, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord." By the old view, Botticelli's reconstitution about 1495 of Apelles' calumny, described by Lucian, an innocent man slandered before a Midas-eared king and dragged to judgment, with the black-robed penitents to follow, and the final pure revelation of naked truth, was aimed on the political level at the papal censure of Savonarola. Botticelli, here his late works confirm Vasari, shaken by those apocalyptic sermons. A strange caution to discredit that, while making an issue of this hall, carved with pagan and Christian subjects, as if the painter had not devoted those years to reading and illustrating Dante, whose purgatory reliefs enforce, by just such polarity, the cleansing of politics and spirit. Perhaps Botticelli bore his share of calumny as well, as in Vasari's story. Without any education and scarce knowing how to read, he writes a commentary on Dante. But who else pursued almost to the point of starving soul's ascent from the rank grovelling of the bad ditches to the flame geometry of Beatrice's Empyrean? In soul as in paint, where was the link but in Botticelli to Leonardo and Michelangelo? From mid-century, as under the pastel calm of Piero della Francesca, here one of the Arezzo frescoes, where a laborer carrying the timber destined centuries after for the true cross becomes a mystic prototype of Christ. What was heightening force and counterforce was the emergence of the new man, new woman, the harmonious space of Piero's religious art, complemented by the transforming boldness of his portrayed patron, Federico de Montefeltro of Urbino, here with his Sforza wife. As the century advances, such assertion swells under the visible interpenetration of Flemish realism and the revived antiquity of Italy, left, one of the Magi, from a Hugo van der Goes altar, about 1470. In the tradition of Van Eyck and Van der Weyden, though already humanized from the south, and right, 10 years later, absorbing and romanizing that Flemish skill, this archer from Mantegna's St. Sebastian. In Florence, 2 portraits from 1470 and 75 by Laurano and Polaiuolo of a Sforza daughter and a Medici son juxtaposed enact Renaissance drama. But what Machiavelli would concentrate in the 1518 Mandragola had been voiced before 1500 and in Spain, in the tragicomedy of the high-born Melibea and her seduction by the somewhat lower Callisto, with the help of the old bawd Celestina. Callisto's passion, if God would give me for the sight of you a seat among his saints in heaven, I would not take it. His idolatry when asked, are you a Christian? I am a Melibean. I acknowledge no other deity in heaven while she remains on earth. Melibea's proud purity, vete, vete, diai torpe. Go, wretch, I cannot tolerate one who would plant in me the delights of illicit love. Her vulnerability to Celestina, that hag who could move stones to lechery by her art, shape tragedy. My daughter, why have you left me to despair, weeping and lonely in this vale of tears? Porque me dejaste triste y solo in hac lacrimarum valle. In France, with Jacques Coeur, merchant prince of Bourges, his motto, à vaillants cœurs, rien's impossible. Renaissance assertion, battling medieval fortune and the brittle world, had sowed that tragic field. Founder of French trade with the Levant, rescuer of the national currency, who financed Charles VII's wars and fought at his side to oust the English from Normandy, who built chapels and established colleges, Coeur, betrayed by the king and accused without pretext of plotting and poisoning, was tried by his enemies, fined what might now be $100 million, and thrown into prison, his goods divided among the king's favorites. After 5 years he escaped, but died of sickness as he led a fleet against the Turk for the relief of Rhodes. At the windows of his Bourges house, these carved servants, man and maid, look out for their master's return. Measure in Florence that advance of earthly assurance. Here 2 sacred births, below of the Virgin, by Giovanni da Milano, later 14th century, with von Wolkenstein's transcription of Italian Ars Nova. Above, Ghirlandaio's 1490 Birth of St. John the Baptist, with Isaac's Mass, formed of Spanish dances, attuned to this coffered room, festive with robed ladies, where a fruit-bearing girl billowing in seems almost to have arrived from Magna Graecia. It is what this outdoor scene from Ghirlandaio's same Santa Maria Novella frescoes perfects, this meeting of Elizabeth and Mary by a walled piazzale across the Arno, those heady youths leaning over where something like the old palace towers from below. In Bruges, that late century enrichment peaks to the gold-housed and jewel-bright miniatures of Memling's reliquary of St. Ursula, Christian life and martyrdom, as in Isaac's dancing Agnus Dei, aglow with delight. Memling's individual scenes, this arrival in Cologne, with the death annunciation in the upper chamber, are as feelingly suspended between the poignance of the story and the gladness of earth as Isaac's homophonic farewell to Innsbruck, Innsbruck, ich muss dich lassen. In Italian magnification of Flemish precision, Memling's reliquary sequence expands to the architectural and perspectival vistas with which Pinturicchio, soon after 1500, muraled the Sienese Cathedral Library. Such tour de force panoramas from the life of Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini left the journey to Basel with its background of harbor and storm, as if the open road of Isaac's songs. Glück ist in allen Gassen, with this refrain from his Flemish "T meisken was jong." Were spun quod libet to a glad missa carminum. Yet here as earlier, the claim of earth advances an always more physical doom. So with Pinturicchio comes an Umbrian complement, Signorelli, his masterpiece, the Apocalypse frescoes at Orvieto, this resurrection of the dead. It is a mood to which Josquin continually returns, miserere. Why is this manuscript so mechanical, its illuminations so dull? The question is unfair, since this landmark of progress is the Gutenberg Bible, printed in German Mainz about 1454. It is mechanical because it was set from movable type and could be reproduced toward a limit which in our time pumps books on and off the cartel shelves like the tasteless apples of a supermarket. Dull in illumination because it no doubt employed what Adam Smith would acclaim as the time-saving principle of division of labor. The multiplied power of Renaissance was to rest on the output of the press. But it will remind us how history dismantles one wall to build another, that, as in Greece, bardic memory disappeared with the written word, the sacred and aristocratic glory of the parchment manuscript could only go under in Europe's forward rush. Meanwhile, a genius was growing up in Medici Florence who would bring Renaissance thought, science, and art to such a harmony as in the spacings of Delarue's sixth voice, Sanctus. The old account of Leonardo as Verrocchio's apprentice painting a beautiful angel left in the master's baptism about 1473 has been confirmed by Bode's study of the oil glazes, which, with X-ray analysis, has also given the landscape above to Leonardo. In this luminous spread of water under rocks, the boy seems to have envisaged what would become the geology of his notebooks. I perceive that the surface of the earth was from of old entirely filled up and covered over in its level plains by the salt waters, and that the mountains, the bones of the earth, with their wide bases penetrated and towered up amid the air, covered over with much high-lying soil. Subsequently, incessant rains have stripped bare part of the lofty summits, so that the rock finds itself exposed to the air, and the earth from the slopes and mountains has raised the floors of the seas, and caused the plain to be uncovered. Cusanus, privative infinity, sheds privation, becoming almost the cosmos, one from the void and formless infinite. As the wisdom of age had touched the boy, child promise smiles on the old Leonardo. This Louvre St. John as precursor, with Pico della Mirandola. Let a certain holy ambition invade the mind, so that we may not be content with mean things, but may aspire to the highest things, and strive with all our force to attain them. For if we will to, we can. He who is a seraph, that is, a lover, is in God, and more, God is in him, and God and he are one. Though the smile is ambiguous in Leonardo's notebooks, behold now the hope and desire of going back to one's own country, or returning to primal chaos, of the man who looks forward to each new spring, and does not perceive he is longing for his dissolution, as elements imprisoned long for the source. What has the precursor precursed? It would be as in Shelley, although a subtler sphinx renew riddles of death Thebes never knew. Had not most of the 1482 letter to Sforza promised instruments of war? I have plans for destroying every fortress not founded upon rock, for making cannon, engines for attack or defense, ships which can resist the fire of cannon, armored cars which will enter the serried ranks of the enemy with their artillery, and behind these the infantry will be able to follow without opposition. Talents applied more than his art in the service of Il Moro and Cesare Borgia, that Caesar, Machiavelli also would have enabled. In the floating utopia of high Renaissance, the modern world, with its explosive potentialities, is born. So with person. In this Dürer, inscribed 1500, Cusanus' omnivoyant God-man becomes the deepest reflection of the mirrored self, As Eckhart had said in a passage that would stir Luther, God has become man in order that I may become God. Was that not the call of the Luther Bible zu der herrlichen Freiheit der Kinder Gottes? The first history of music on records, the parlophone 2,000 years, paired with the Dufay trumpet Gloria already heard, Josquin's Et Incarnatus from the Missa Pangelingua, and was made man. Thus, Berlin chorus and all, the Western incarnation takes up the cross of the world. Michelangelo in the storm to follow, tuba mirum spargen sonum, felt also in the tientos of Cabithon, must have dreamed sometimes of the Lorenzo de' Medici Florence of his youth. There Botticelli had brought Gothic line to an ultimate clarity of nostalgia in joy. Leaves, waves, blown roses, the pure platonic nude, as Poliziano had described in La Giostra, that unfinished romance which carries in germ the whole future of paganizing poetry and art. A woman born of the waves, lovesome and free in every act, in her face more than human, wafted by lively zephyrs to the shore upon a shell, while heaven smiles upon her. You would have sworn the goddess came from the wave, gathering with her right hand her golden hair, the other lifted the sweet fruit to save from greedy spoil, and as she touched the shore with sacred feet, seen herbs and flowers pave the barren strand. And marked with what light air 3 nymphs accost her, and her coming hail, and close invest her in a starry veil. Michelangelo could have remembered the music too. Isaac, not the brooding lamentation, but ballades sighed by the viols, as wistfully glad as the receding curves of Botticelli's shore. In that backward-looking, even Michelangelo, or whoever after him, has been most partisan in the embattled grandeur of Promethean consciousness, might drop, like Milton's Adam and Eve, some natural tears. Since part of every soul must yearn like the imprisoned elements for a naive, anonymous grace, here from Mary of Burgundy's Book of Hours, the daily reading in that same book become an allegorical window. Such quiet pre-selfhood lightens an English wedding fragment from the time. The maidens came when I was in my mother's bower. I had all that I would. The Bailey beareth the bell away. The lily, the rose I lay. The silver is white, red is the gold. The robes they lay in fold. The Bailey beareth the bell away. The lily, the rose I lay. And through the glass window shines the sun. How should I love, and I so young? The Bailey beareth the bell away. The lily, the rose I lay. As frail, as bright, as the unmatched maiden of the other poem, as dew in April that falleth on the spray, mother and maiden was never known but she. Well may such a lady, goddess mother, be.